Good morning. Today I'll be covering chapter 15 and chapter 16 of Leviticus, and then going over the notes for each of the chapters. And let's jump into it. Chapter 15, discharges causing uncleanness. The Lord said to Moses and Aaron, "Speak to the Israelites and say to them, when any man has an unusual bodily discharge, such a discharge is unclean. Whether it continues flowing from his body or is blocked, it will make him unclean. This is how his discharge will bring about uncleanness. Any bed the man with a discharge lies on will be unclean. Anything he sits on will be unclean. Anyone who touches his bed must wash their clothes and bathe with water, and they will be unclean till evening. Whoever sits on anything that the man with a discharge sat on must wash their clothes and bathe with water, and they will be unclean till evening. Whoever touches the man who has a discharge must wash their clothes and bathe with water, and they will be unclean till evening. If the man with the discharge spits on anyone who is clean, they must wash their clothes and bathe with water, and they will be unclean till evening. Everything the man sits on when riding will be unclean, and whoever touches any of the things that are under him will be unclean till evening. Whoever picks up those things must wash their clothes and bathe with water, and they will be unclean till evening. Anyone the man with a discharge touches without rinsing his hands with water must wash their clothes and bathe with water, and they will be unclean till evening. A clay pot that the man touches must be broken, and any wooden article is to be rinsed with water. When a man is cleansed from his discharge, he is to count off 7 days for his ceremonial cleansing. He must wash his clothes and bathe himself with fresh water, and he will be clean. On the 8th day he must take 2 doves or 2 young pigeons and come before the Lord to the entrance to the tent of meeting, and give them to the priest. The priest is to sacrifice them, the one for a sin offering and the other for a burnt offering. In this way he will make atonement before the Lord for the man because of his discharge. When a man has an emission of semen, he must bathe his whole body with water, and he will be unclean till evening. Any clothing or leather that has semen on it must be washed with water, and it will be unclean till evening. When a man has sexual relations with a woman and there is an emission of semen, both of them must bathe with water, and they will be unclean till evening. When a woman has a regular flow of blood, the impurity of her monthly period will last 7 days, and anyone who touches her will be unclean till evening. Anything she lies on during her period will be unclean, and anything she sits on will be unclean. Anyone who touches her will be unclean till evening. Anything she lies on during her period will be unclean, and anything she sits on will be unclean. Anyone who touches her bed will be unclean. They must wash their clothes and bathe with water, and they will be unclean till evening. Anyone who touches anything she sits on will be unclean. They must wash their clothes and bathe with water, and they will be unclean till evening. Whether it is the bed or anything she was sitting on, when anyone touches it, they will be unclean till evening. If a man has sexual relations with her and her monthly flow touches him, he will be unclean for 7 days. Any bed he lies on will be unclean. When a woman has a discharge of blood for many days at a time other than her monthly period, or has a discharge that continues beyond her period, she will be unclean as long as she has the discharge, just as in the days of her period. Any bed she lies on while her discharge continues will be unclean, as in her bed during her monthly period, and anything she sits on will be unclean, as during her period. Anyone who touches them will be unclean. They must wash their clothes and bathe with water, and they will be unclean till evening. When she is cleansed from her discharge, she must count off 7 days, and after that she will be ceremonial clean. On the 8th day she must take 2 doves or 2 young pigeons and bring them to the priest at the entrance to the tent of meeting. The priest is to sacrifice one for a sin offering and the other for a burnt offering. In this way he will make atonement for her before the Lord for the uncleanness of her discharge. You must keep the Israelites separate from things that make them unclean, so they will not die in their uncleanness for defiling my dwelling place, which is among them. These are the regulations for a man with a discharge, for anyone made unclean by any emission of semen, for a woman in her monthly period, for a man or woman with a discharge, and for a man who has sexual relations with a woman who is ceremonial unclean. And that's the end of chapter 15, but not the notes. So let's get into the notes. Alright, we'll be starting with verse 18. And that is, when a man has sexual relations with a woman and there's the emission of semen, both of them must bathe with water, and they'll be unclean till evening. And it says the verses in this section are not implying that sex is dirty or disgusting. God created sex for first the enjoyment of married couples. That's why you're supposed to wait till you're married to have sex. Second, the continuation of the human race. And third, the preservation the preservation of the covenant community. Everything must be seen and done with a view toward God's love and ultimate authority. Sex is not separate from spirituality or God's care. God is concerned about our sexual habits. He designed us as wonderfully complex and unified creations, and this includes our bodies and sexuality. We tend to try to separate our physical and spiritual lives, but they are inseparably intertwined. God must be Lord over our whole selves, including our private lives. In what ways do you acknowledge your relationship with God when it comes to your sexuality? Think about that. It's important. Next is verse 32 to 33, and it's the last part of the notes for chapter 15. And that was, these are the regulations for a man with a discharge, for anyone made unclean by any emission of semen, for a woman in her monthly period, for a man or a woman with a discharge, and for a man who has sexual relations with a woman who is ceremonially unclean. And it says God is concerned about health. He upholds the dignity of the person, the dignity of the body, and the dignity of the sexual experience. His commands call the people to avoid unhealthy practices and promote healthy ones with practical instructions. Washing was a God-directed means to maintain physical health. Acts of purification or cleansing were God-directed means to preserve spiritual dignity. Millennia before the rise of the AIDS epidemic, God's directions already preserved people from known and unknown dangers. This shows God's high regard for sex and sexuality. In our day, sex has been degraded by shocking media exposure. It has become public domain, not private celebration. We are called to have a high regard for sex, both in good health and in purity. Our deepest form of gratitude to God for the gift of sex is expressed in how we use the gift. Alright, that is the end of chapter 15 now. And now it's time for chapter 16. And we go into part 4 of Leviticus, which is instructions for the altar. And now it's chapter 16, the Day of Atonement. The Lord spoke to Moses after the death of the 2 sons of Aaron who died when they approached the Lord. The Lord said to Moses, "Tell your brother Aaron that he is not to come whenever he chooses into the most holy place behind the curtain in front of the atonement cover on the ark, or else he will die, for I will appear in the cloud over the atonement cover." This is how Aaron is to enter the most holy place. He must first bring a young bull for a sin offering and a ram for a burnt offering. He is to put on the sacred linen tunic with linen undergarments next to his body. He is to tie the linen sash around him and put on the linen turban. These are sacred garments, so he must bathe himself with water before he puts them on. From the Israelite community, he is to take 2 male goats for a sin offering and a ram for a burnt offering. Aaron is to offer the bull for his own sin offering to make atonement for himself and his household. Then he is to take the 2 goats and present them before the Lord at the entrance to the tent of meeting. He is to cast lots for the 2 goats, one lot for the Lord and the other for the scapegoat. Aaron shall bring the goat whose lot falls to the Lord and sacrifice it for a sin offering. But the goat chosen by lot as the scapegoat shall be presented alive before the Lord to be used for making atonement by sending it into the wilderness as a scapegoat. Aaron shall bring the bull for his own sin offering to make atonement for himself and his household, and he is to slaughter the bull for his own sin offering. He is to take a censer full of burning coals from the altar before the Lord and 2 handfuls of finely ground fragrant incense and take them behind the curtain. He is to put the incense on the fire before the Lord, and the smoke of the incense will conceal the atonement cover above the tablets of the covenant law, so that he will not die. He is to take some of the bull's blood, and with his finger sprinkle it on the front of the atonement cover. Then he shall sprinkle some of it with his finger 7 times before the atonement cover. He shall then slaughter the goat for the sin offering for the people, and take its blood behind the curtain, and do with it as he did with the bull's blood. He shall sprinkle it on the atonement cover and in front of it. In this way he will make atonement for the most holy place because of the uncleanness and rebellion of the Israelites, wherever their sins have been. He is to do the same for the tent of meeting. Sorry, lost where was that? Oh no. He is to do the same for the tent of meeting, which is among them in the midst of their uncleanness. No one is to be in the tent of meeting from the time Aaron goes in to make atonement in the most holy place until he comes out, having made atonement for himself, his household, and the whole community of Israel. Then he shall come out to the altar that is before the Lord and make atonement for it. He shall take some of the bull's blood and some of the goat's blood and and put it on all the horns of the altar. He shall sprinkle some of the blood on it with his finger 7 times to cleanse it, and to consecrate it from the uncleanness of the Israelites. When Aaron has finished making atonement for the most holy place, the tent of meeting, and the altar, he shall bring forward the live goat. He is to lay both hands on the head of the live goat and confess over it all the wickedness and rebellion of the Israelites, all their sins, and put them on the goat's head. He shall send the goat away into the wilderness in the care of someone appointed for the task. The goat will carry on itself all their sins to a remote place, and the man shall release it in the wilderness. Then Aaron is to go into the tent of meeting and take off the linen garments he put on before he entered the most holy place, and he is to leave them there. He shall bathe himself with water in the sanctuary area and put on his regular garments. Then he shall come out and sacrifice the burnt offering for himself and the burnt offering for the people, to make atonement for himself and for the people. He shall also burn the fat of the sin offering on the altar. The man who releases the goat as a scapegoat must wash his clothes and bathe himself with water. Afterward he may come into the camp. The bull and the goat for the sin offerings, whose blood was brought into the most holy place to make atonement, must be taken outside the camp. Their hides, flesh, and intestines are to be burned up. The man who burns them must wash his clothes and bathe himself with water. Afterward he may come into the camp. This is to be a lasting ordinance for you. On the 10th day of the 7th month you must deny yourselves, and not do any work, whether native born or a foreigner residing among you, because on this day atonement will be made for you, to cleanse you. Then before the Lord you will be clean from all your sins. It is the day of Sabbath rest, and you must deny yourselves. It is a lasting ordinance. The priest who is anointed and ordained to succeed his father as high priest is to make atonement. He is to put on the sacred linen garments and make atonement for the most holy place, for the tent of meeting and the altar, and for the priests and all the members of the community. This is to be a lasting ordinance for you. Atonement is to be made once a year for all the sins of the Israelites, and it was done, as the Lord commanded Moses. And that is the end of chapter 16. Now it's time for the notes. Alright. First up, we'll be looking over the whole chapter. And it says, the Day of Atonement was the greatest day of the year for Israel. The Hebrew word for atone means to cover. Old Testament sacrifices could not actually remove sins, only covered them. On this day, this people confessed their sins as a nation, and the high priest went into the most holy place to make atonement for them. Sacrifices were made and blood was shed so that the people's sins could be covered until Christ's sacrifice on the cross would give people the opportunity to have their sin removed forever. Next up is just from verse 1 to verse 25. So that is all the way to, sending the goat out and not them washing themselves. Everything up to Aaron washing himself, but not everyone else washing themselves. And it says, Aaron had to spend hours preparing himself to meet God, but we can approach God anytime. Hebrews chapter 4, verse 16. What a privilege! We are offered easier access to God than even the high priest of Old Testament times. Still, we must never forget that God is holy, nor let this privilege cause us to approach him carelessly. The way to God has been opened to us by Christ, but easy access to God does not eliminate our need to prepare our hearts as we draw near to him in prayer. So you should focus in on what you're going to do. Pray to the Lord for guidance and wisdom, but also narrow your heart down and not be thinking about other things as you're praying. And just focusing on the Lord and just trust that and just talk to the God. Okay, next is verse 5 to 8. It says, this event with the 2 goats occurred on the Day of Atonement. The 2 goats represent the 2 ways God was dealing with the Israelites' sin. First, he was forgiving their sin through the first goat, which was sacrificed. And second, he was removing their guilt through the second goat, the scapegoat, which was sent into the wilderness. The same ritual had to be repeated every year. Jesus Christ's death replaced the system once and for all. We can have our sins forgiven and guilt removed by placing our trust in Christ. And that is Hebrews chapter 10, verse 1 to 18, if you want to go read more on that. And lastly, I believe, the last part of the notes will be over verse 12. And that was He is to take a censer full of burning coals from the altar before the Lord, and 2 handfuls of finely ground fragrant incense to take them behind the curtain. It says a censer was a dish or shallow bowl that hung from a chain or was carried with tongs. Inside the censer were placed incense, a combination of sweet-smelling resins and spices, and burning coals from the altar. On the Day of Atonement, the high priest entered the most holy place carrying a smoking censer. The smoke shielded him from the Ark of the Covenant and the presence of God. Otherwise, he would die. Incense may also have had a very practical purpose. The sweet smell drew the people's attention to the morning and evening sacrifices and helped cover the sometimes foul smell of the slaughtered animals. And that is the end of chapter 15 and 16 of Leviticus. Tomorrow will be chapter 17 and chapter 18 of Leviticus. Have a great day.